The biography, Rising Star, The Making of Barack Obama, has been described as a bloated, dreary slog of a read by the New York Times. Well, as political rights, it's a stunning and indispensable work of history. It seems the difference is whether one is a huge fan of the mythology surrounding the nation's first African-American president, or whether one wants to look behind the curtain like in the book The Wizard of Oz. Joining us now by phone from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania is Rising Star's Pulitzer Prize-winning author, David Garrow. David, it's very interesting to read these critics. And what you did is you wanted to show a complete 360-degree vertical and horizontal look at who Barack Hussein Obama is.
Yes, exactly, Roland.
And with that, that includes warts and all.
My goal with this was to do something that would be really thorough and authoritative and would stand up for decades to come. I started on this in large part because I was so disappointed during the first presidential campaign back in 2008 at how uncurious a lot of the biographical journalism about Barack's early life was. I put 9 years into this, over 1,000 interviews, all done by me, and I think it's a very thorough, balanced, authoritative account of Barack's life prior to the White House.
And when you say thorough, 1,078 pages. The epilogue notes alone, 271 pages. It is a huge book. And one of the things that in your research, you showed how the president sort of fudged and danced around some facts about his early life. And for you, as an esteemed author, your deal is the public deserves to have really this unvarnished look at who he was, or who he is.
Exactly. I'd highlight two things, Roland. Barack's own memoir, Dreams from My Father, published in 1995. By that time, Barack already 110% had his eyes set on a political career, and it's a campaign autobiography. It's very strategically composed in order to help him, especially in African American communities. And then, as I think many people realize, the Barack Obama whom we saw as president was a very different politician from the more progressive figure he had been in earlier years back in Illinois.
Yeah, and like, for instance, you know, the White House got really upset with me when Vice President Joe Biden got ahead of the White House when it came to same-sex marriage, and they said, well, the president has evolved. And I said, no, he hasn't. The president evolved when he previously supported it. Then he devolved when he ran for the United States Senate because he knew he needed to be against same-sex marriage when he was running, and then later he came out for it.
You're exactly right. Back in 1995, there's a interest group questionnaire in Barack's own handwriting where at that time he says he supports gay marriage. Then he backed away from it. And as you quite rightly stress, only Joe Biden, led him back to where he had once been. Same thing with the intelligence community and investigations of journalists. After 9/11, back in 2001, Barack Obama was a really outspoken critic of the Patriot Act and the intelligence community. As president, he ended up pretty deeply infatuated with the CIA and a lot of the people who had worked under George W. Bush.
First of all, I'm going to do this here. I'm going to go to a break right now. We come back, we'll continue our conversation with author David Garrow. We're talking about, of course, his amazing book on President Barack Obama. And so that'll be next. News 19 TV 1. David Garrow of the book Rising Star. Please put the book up for our audience to actually see. It is about the Rising Star, the life of President Barack Obama. David, you talked about working 9 years on this. Do you believe that when you talk about this, I mentioned earlier this mythical idea, and the beauty of the president's change and hope slogan was that he could speak to 100,000 people, and 100,000 people can have 100,000 different views about what change and hope was. And I said it then, he was able to appeal to people, and everybody could come away with a totally different view of who he was, and he sort of filled everybody's expectations. And that, to me, I think, is what was also driving this criticism of you in this book. The people are mad that you actually are presenting who he actually is.
Yes, I think we've had a few critics whose partisan support for Barack has trumped, so to speak, their professionalism. But I think most people who've actually picked up this book realize that it's a work of very serious history. And I think that it will, without question, stand the test of time. I think that the partisan intensity that we have now with Donald Trump in the White House leads people to look back very fondly on the Obama presidency, maybe a little too fondly in terms of not being able to publicly acknowledge the ways in which the Obama presidency disappointed so many of us.
And first of all, Joel has a question, and again, for folks, just a little perspective here. David Garrow, folks, when we mentioned him as a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, he won the Pulitzer Prize for his book, this book here. You can show it, please, Bearing the Cross, Martin Luther King Jr. and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. He won the Pulitzer Prize for that particular book. Joel, your question.
Yeah, and David, thanks for joining. Quick question. You revealed a lot of personal details about the president here, particularly about his romantic life, and I think that's what got a lot of folks to be uncomfortable with some of the subject. Why did you feel like that was necessary to include?
Barack had two really important, indeed transformative relationships before he married Michelle Obama. Genevieve Cook, the daughter of an Australian diplomat, Sheila Yeager, who's now one of the top U.S. experts on Korea. Barack omitted Sheila and Genevieve in toto from his own memoir of his life, and that was astonishing to me. Barack and Sheila had a very intense relationship, lasted almost 5 years, and to me it's amazing that, someone could serve 8 years as President of the United States, and one of the, defining relationships of their life, nonetheless, had remained entirely secret.
Well, and the other thing is, here's what I don't understand. I read 7 to 9 books at one time. I've read numerous books on political figures where you're covering the total person. You kind of include that stuff. Who folks dated, who they married. I mean, I've read books on Dr. King where he was in love with a white woman when he was at Boston University who he wanted to marry, but friends told him, you can't do that living back in the South. I'm literally reading Nick Cott's book right now, Judgment Days, and that's in the book.
Yes, and that lady is still alive, believe it or not, Roland. There's a forthcoming book, probably a year away, that really is going to do a phenomenally thorough job on Dr. King's life during seminary.
All right.
Yeah, just following up on that, you mentioned previously that President Obama omitted that background and that he was very strategic in how he framed his memoir. But wouldn't you think that it is logical that someone who has ambition, and quite frankly, I don't know a president of the United States who doesn't have ambition, that's kind of how they get to be president of the United States, wouldn't it have been illogical for him to do otherwise, particularly understanding what culture that we live in?
Oh, of course. But I think a lot of people who've in years past read Dreams from My Father mistakenly thought that that's a book that was written and published before Barack had any idea of being a
And David, I got to interrupt you. In fact, in that book, he created a composite character. So the woman he described actually didn't exist. It was a combination of several people. So that was actually a fictional person.
Oh, exactly. Barack had made up his mind back in 1987, in part informed by watching Harold Washington, Chicago's first black mayor, seeing what a really remarkable, effervescent politician Washington was. That's what led Barack to choose a political future. And Barack goes to law school in 1988, very much already focused on pursuing a career as a politician and dreaming of the White House.
And when you talk about Barack Obama being a rising star, do you talk much about your book as far as his accomplishments before becoming to the presidency and some of his activities as congressman, as state senator? Could you expound upon that a little bit, or as far as his
the book
rise?
1,078 pages. I covered that.
Well,
David, I get about 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Sure. Oh, thank you very much. No, I think this is a book that will really be an eye-opener for many people who remain interested in Barack. And the story of his pre-presidential life, particularly winning the Senate seat in Illinois, it's a wonderful story.
David Garrow, we certainly appreciate you joining us here on News One Now TV One, folks. The book is called Rising Star. You definitely want to pick it up. If you can pick it up, you might need some help picking it up because it is again a lengthy book, but very thorough, very well researched. David Garrow, we appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roland.
Back on News One Now in 60 seconds.